The chapter about groups is very important because nothing explains the effects of socialization or the process of socialization better than our membership into groups. Groups can be separated into primary, like your family, or secondary, like this class. A primary group is characterized by a small number of members that are connected through intensely emotional relationships. The relationships ideally should last for a very long time, and usually they carry out together emotional tasks. On the other hand, the secondary group consists of a larger number of people. They have short-term goals, the interaction is superficial, impersonal, and they come usually with a deadline. However, the important thing about groups is what I just said before, that they shape us in good ways and bad ways. So I'm going to mention the dangerous paths to which we may develop problematic behaviors. And groups are responsible for enforcing groupthink, conformity, obedience, and in-group versus out-group mentality. So when it comes to groupthink, is the tendency to conform when actually you disagree strongly, despite the fact that the decision you're conforming to could have ethical dimensions. One example is, well, there are many examples from history, like political decisions that proved to be disastrous, like the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the Challenger disaster in NASA, where we know that from later testimony that people disagreed with those decisions, but they kept their mouth shut. Why? Well, groupthink is extremely powerful because it operates on an illusion of unanimity. You think that everybody agrees. So because the decision is so serious, you don't dare speak up because you are disturbing the balance of something you consider extremely serious, and probably you are making a mistake, you think, although you're not making a mistake. You're also subjected to collective rationalization that what the leader usually says and those around him is the correct way of interpreting the situation. There is a belief about the group's inherent morality. There is a stereotypical attitude towards members of an out-group, and there is direct pressure on the dissenters. So here the group makes faulty decisions. For example, with the Challenger disaster, when it exploded, we saw from the minutes that there was pressure from the administrators on the engineers to give the go-ahead, despite the fact that there were serious doubts about certain parts of the rocket and how they would behave under very cold temperatures. And the day of the launch was very, very cold that day. So the administrators actually told the engineers to take off their engineering hat and put on their management hat, and that never in the past did they have a 100% safe flight. So here you have group makers making faulty decisions, and this faulty decision pressure is leading to a deterioration of mental efficiency, reality testing, and moral judgment. When it comes to conformity, however, conformity is when you simply deny the evidence of your own eyes because you don't want to make waves. It is like groupthink, but lower in intensity or seriousness of effects. There is a famous experiment, the Ash experiment, described in your book, where the experimenter asked some innocent subjects to test, to match two lines. One piece of paper had 3 lines of different size, the other had only 1 line. So they were asked to match the 1 line to the correct size line of the other paper. And those innocent subjects, however, were surrounded by students who had been instructed by the experimenter to give false answers. And we observed that when the others were giving faulty answers, there was a high level of conformity by the innocent subject. However, his conformity was dropping when there was one more student in the group that would give the right answer, and also his conformity would drop when he was asked to give his answer in writing and not verbally. So the differences between conformity and groupthink would be: conformity is doing what other people expect you to do, and groupthink turns the group into a superior being whose interests have to be upheld at any cost. The other important thing about groups is that we tend to identify with the groups that are like us on the basis of gender, culture, religion, race, age, etc. There are many groups out there that we simply do not trust or we dislike, and we call those out-groups. So there is a friction constantly from day one between in-groups versus out-groups, which facilitates tremendously the growth of stereotypes and the growth of mistrust, which leads, of course, to the growth of bias and prejudice towards an out-group. So when we have certain negative stereotypes about the out-group just because it belongs to the other side, we tend to ignore the reality of the other group, and we translate the other group through the power of our own stereotypes. Groups also promote leadership, because you have to have more than one person to have a group, and one of the two usually becomes a leader. Of course, the more people, the more complicated the processes of electing a leader, but we have observed all sorts of leaderships under the dynamics of the group. We have instrumental leaders, for example, that are very much task-oriented. We have expressive leaders who are promoting emotional strength and health, and often you find leaders that combine both. The instrumental capabilities of carrying out a task successfully, but at the same time the expressive leadership capability, which is uniting the people together and taking care of their emotional needs as well. We also have other types of leadership. Democratic leadership is when the group encourages participation through elections of representatives, etc. And then we're moving on to two other types of leadership that are kind of interesting. One is called by a French name laissez-faire, which means leave it alone, or hands-off, which encourages the leader to leave the members of the group alone to self-manage. How do we do that? In many businesses, actually, especially when the employees are highly trained, the leader tells them what the outcome should be, what the target is, and then he leaves them alone to carry out and execute whatever needs to be executed to reach this goal on their own way. They find out the way. And finally, we have the worst type of leadership ever, which is the authoritarian leader, who is probably a dictator that has oppressed his people, that has violated human rights, or sometimes pure logic on how to execute a task, and he imposes his will no matter what. Groups have also been the basis for growth of total institutions and bureaucracies. Total institution is a secondary group. A total institution has been assigned the task of re-socializing people, whether this is the military or a prison or a monastery or a mental asylum. They try to take the old personality away from the person and impose a new personality in him. How do they do that? Through a very strict hierarchy, through uniformity, everybody has to wear the same things, through a very strictly enforced schedule. Another large secondary group that has invaded our lives is the growth of bureaucracies. And a bureaucracy has been successful. Weber has studied bureaucracies extensively. They have been successful because they are efficient and rational. They rationalize everything and they try to do things efficiently. They try. Do they succeed? Quite often we have seen that they do not succeed in carrying out things efficiently because it takes them sometimes a very long time to reach their goal. So the characteristic of a bureaucracy is that they have introduced rationality into their modus of operations, which means they try to judge everybody and everything on the basis of a number. This is why you're getting all those satisfaction surveys from 1 to 5, because they want feedback on the basis of 1 to 5, not in paragraphs. And once they have rationalized everything in terms of numbers, they try to calculate decision making. That if I do this, it will get me an 8. If I do that, it will get me a 5 in a matrix of outcomes. The bureaucracy also operates on the exclusion of personal feelings. Just calculability is the basis of decisions. And once you exclude human feelings or human understanding from human relationships and interactions that lead to the completion of the task,